Well, welcome folks, and to let you know where we are, first we talked about an overall model for how to better talk about mental health. And then the next one you watched was all about anxiety and what I call the deeper dive. And in the deeper dive, we talked about that in order to deal with anxiety, think of it like skiing, that there are certain tools we want kids to have to help them deal with anxiety. And that's what we're going to talk about now, are what are those tools. And so the model that I looked at all the other models out there, and I tried to take what was best and find my own and what I've learned the most, and I developed a model called Learning to Face Your Fears. And FACE is an acronym, which is a certain set of skills that we want kids to know how to have in order to better tackle their anxiety and not let it take over and get them to avoid. And so for this segment, we are going to focus on that first set of skills, which starts with what I would call the FStep. And the FStep stands, as you can see the whole model out, but the FStep stands for feeling anxious with a question mark. And that's what we want to start, is again, what are the skills around this step? So there are actually 3 skills in the FStep that we want kids to be able to have, or adults or anyone, when they recognize their anxiety. And the first step is the recognition step. And that's really important. And why is it so important? Is why would it be important to know you're thirsty? Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer, because you want to then know I'm thirsty, because then you would want to take a drink. Or why would we want to know when we're hungry? Why would we want to know when we're sleepy? Because once we know, then we can do something about it. And that's the same thing behind all emotions. We want to know how we're feeling, because then we can figure out that smart brain, the healthy way to deal with it. And the other reason we want to start with feelings is because it can become an organizing principle in our brain. When we understand what we're experiencing and what we're feeling, that helps us go, oh, that's what this is, that's hunger, so I can go do something. And I always give this example in this moment. So I'm from California, the land of earthquakes. And imagine you coming from Colorado or wherever you are, flew to California, and no one ever told you about this phenomenon. And so all of a sudden you wake up in the middle of the night with the ground shaking, windows breaking, people screaming, and you had no word to describe that experience. What do you think is going to happen in your brain? You got it, utter chaos. You're going to think the world's coming to an end. But once you can have a word for it, oh, this is an earthquake, it can still be scary, but then we can know what to do. Then that training around earthquakes can kick in. So that's why we want to understand and be able to help our kids really know how they're feeling, what they need. And so that's the first thing we want to teach or understand, is A, that label is important. And then the next thing to understand, how do we know our feelings? And it seems pretty simple, but it's actually a little more complicated. And this is what our brain looks for, these 4 inputs. It looks for, what other feelings do I know that are similar to what I'm feeling right now? What are the thoughts that I'm having? So if it was thirst, it might be thoughts for water, Gatorade. It might be cravings. What are some behaviors that I might feel when I'm thirsty? I might get a little irritable. I might be walking towards the fridge, looking at different beverage options. And then a big one, in a way we know our feelings a lot too, is our body. Our physiology lets us know. So our brain looks at these 4 different inputs, and then it helps decide based on that what kind of feeling state we're in. So let's take a minute and talk a little more about anxiety under these 4 states. So what are the feelings that go along with anxiety? Where we might be having that part of our brain tell us to avoid, get out of here. And these might be some other things if you hear your kids say, you might want to look for, is worry brain also getting involved? I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, I'm angry. All of those might be there and they might be present too, but also some of that anxious energy. A way I really try to help people is by looking at thoughts, and anxious thoughts have certain qualities. The first thing, remember, is anxious thoughts are always going to tell you what could go wrong and why to avoid. And the other thing is they're going to get locked in, and if we can't let something go, if we keep thinking about it over and over, and we can't just stop, that's probably a sign that we had an anxious response or we're anxious about it. The other thing is, I call it kind of a hurricane. That anxious thoughts kind of start small, like, oh, we need to get out of this party, I'm not having fun. Oh, we should go. And they start spiraling more. We gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta get out of here, can't deal, go, go, go. And they take over more of our brain space. The next category are what are anxious behaviors. And anxious behaviors are anything that involve avoidance. So cleaning your house can be an anxious behavior. And so recognizing when you're avoiding something or not wanting to do, that's a sign that your anxiety might be going off. So when I tell adults or high school students a lot, if there's something on your to-do list and it's been there 2 or 3 days and you haven't taken care of it, maybe your anxious brain is a little more taking over and you're more anxious about it than you realize. But a big way we kind of intuit and know we're anxious is our physiology, is our body lets us know. And that can be anything related to that fight or flight phenomenon. So a lot of people experience it as their chest is pounding. They can feel hot in their core because in fight or flight, your blood is all going to your core. Stomach issues is part of that. Headaches, feeling really tense in your shoulders, sweating. These are all signs that your anxiety system is getting involved. And so we want kids to learn this and see this. And so that we can help them then go, oh, that's my worry brain. And so that's one of the first skills we want to do and help them practice and identify is what is their anxiety telling them and that their worry brain is going off. So after you kind of have talked to your kids about how we recognize our feelings and make them aware, because these are skills, folks, remember you want to help practice. So there's some ways to practice that are going to show up. So one thing I like to do is to print out a sheet of feelings, or you can ask your school counselor or school and they can give you one. And we start playing the scenario game. I'll throw out a scenario, and such as I'll throw it out to you. You just found out you won the lottery, and you are now a multi-millionaire. Give me 2 feelings you might feel if that were the scenario. Now, next scenario, you looked at the ticket again and you realized you were 1 number off and now you missed it. Now how are you feeling? Give me 2 feelings. So talking about scenarios are a great way to practice finding your feelings, but also talking about your feelings during your day, or having your kids talk more about what feelings they do. And with littler kids, sometimes it can be helpful to have them draw their feelings, to use things like what color would you put to this feeling and have them draw it. There's all ways to adapt, but helping bring more in the language of feeling to help them understand their experience. And remember, it's so important because once I can better know how I'm feeling, it can be a guide for what I need to do. So after we know how we're feeling, the next skill we want to do in the F step is learn to put numbers to feelings. So the fancy term for this is scaling. And scaling is we want to know how strong am I feeling this feeling, and I use a number scale 1 to 10. So a 10 is I'm feeling it so intensely, and 1, I'm not feeling it very little or not at all. And so why this is really helpful with any feeling, but where we want to focus it a lot with anxiety, is if we know our kid is feeling at a 10 on their anxiety meter about going to school, we might need to do different things than if they're anxious about going to school at a 2. You might expect that they can push through and do a 2, where if they're at a 10, you might need to work some more skills and help them be able to do that. And I always give this joke or example at this time, but to kind of help you see scaling in a different way. So I'm not a native Coloradoan, but one of the things I like to do with my kids is to ski. And what I've learned with skiing, because we go up during the day, is if you don't leave before 6 a.m. in the morning, you're going to be stuck in traffic and going to be miserable. So I'm pretty attuned that we got to get going at 5:50. And I have the kids in the car and we're ready to go, all the stuff that you need. And imagine that scenario, you get everyone in the car, you know what's going to happen, you're going to hit traffic at 6 o'clock, everyone's in, and then you hear this words or this statement, Daddy, I got to go to the bathroom. So now you know about scaling. So like me, you might say, well, how bad do you have to go? And if they said, well, it's a 1 right now, you might say, okay, can you hold it? If it starts to be a 5 or 6, let me know and let's try to beat some of this traffic and get out. But if they said it's a 10, of course you're going to say, okay, stop, go, and we'll wait. So again, scaling is a fancy way to kind of know how much response you might need to give. And then we'll talk about it later, but when you start to deconstruct and fight anxiety by setting up what I'll call ski mountains later, we'll talk about them, or hierarchies, knowing how anxious it makes them can help you set them up more effectively. So it's a great tool to have in your toolbox, the ability to scale emotions. So again, how do you practice this as a parent? Is break out those scenarios again. So throw out a scenario and ask them, how much anxiety would this give you? You have to go into Target by yourself and buy something. What number would that be? I call it your worry meter. How anxious would that make you? Surprise, you have to go fly to Hawaii by yourself and live there for a week. How anxious does that make you? So you can just throw out scenarios, or you can ask them as they're about to do events, what number is this on your worry meter? That new team, that new soccer camp, that new whatever's coming up. How are you feeling about going to school today? What number is that on your worry meter? Or that test? So again, getting that vernacular into the conversation can be helpful. And then once we know how anxious it makes them, the first tool that really comes into play is we need to have the ability to keep our smart brain online. And these are called calming tools. Calming tools are the things that we need to do to lower our arousal and get our smart brain online to help fight the anxiety. And so calming skills have 5 rules that I tell kids. The first thing I share is number 1, it has to work. But every skill, we want them to have 2 that work, and if it doesn't, that's okay. We'll find ones that do. Number 2, the calming skill has to be safe. If it's safe and it works, you can probably use it. Number 3, it can't draw attention to you. So actually yelling at the top of your lungs is really a good calming skill, but that's going to draw a ton of attention to you and can't do that all the time. And then a big one, remember, avoidance is the enemy when it comes to anxiety. So one of the tools you'll see is distraction. Distraction is a great way to calm ourselves down, but if distraction then leads to avoidance, if I can't come back to that thing, then I can't use it as a tool. And the last one, we need some that are portable. Because if our only thing is our blanket in our bedroom, when we're anxious at school, that's not going to help us. So these are kind of the 5 rules of a good calming tool. And every person's job that I work with, including you parents and kids, we want everyone to have 2. Every person needs to have 2 that they've practiced, they use, that they can use to calm themselves down when either their emotion brain is taking over or their anxious brain, to help them then deal with what it is in a healthy way. So with that in mind, what are all these tools? And I've scanned the literature, looked and saw all of them, and I put them into 4 buckets. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is a pretty big list of some of the things we know that help us calm down and get our smart brain back. And you can see I put them into kind of 4 categories to organize them. So there are certain ways to calm ourselves using our body, and that can include learning to better modulate our breath, which we call diaphragmatic breathing, and I'll teach you that in a moment. There's stretching, exercise, or PMR, which stands for progressive muscle relaxation. So what we've learned is if you squeeze a muscle group and let it relax, after, it sends a calming response to our body. Then there's things that involve getting our mind involved to calm us down. That can be learning to visualize things. There's this tool called grounding, which helps bring us back to the moment. Laughter, we need our smart brain to laugh, so laughing can be. Mindfulness is another tool that helps us get centered, that helps get our smart brain back. As you can see, distraction is on there, but we talked about it. If it works for you and you can watch a video for 5 minutes and it calms you down and then you can go back to what's making you anxious, awesome, you can use it. But if 5 minutes of a video leads to a whole episode, leads to a binge, and you never get back to it, you shouldn't use distraction. Then there are getting your senses involved. So having squeeze balls, things we can touch. For teens, they use a lot of music with them, finding a calming playlist, having them have it on their phones, certain lotions, scents that they can have. One cool project a parent did with their kid is they went to a fabric shop and they found a fabric that the kid felt really was comfortable and they liked touching. They bought some of that fabric. They went to a scent shop and they found some scents the kids really liked. Then they bought the oil of that scent. They put that scent into rice and they made beanbags that the kid could take with them, and it became a cool thing at the school that the kid would make for friends. So also to remember, sometimes we get bombarded by our senses. They can help us calm. So with some kids, removing them from senses, getting them to a quiet, a dark place, getting them away from sounds can help them also relax. So that's on there as well. And then the last bucket is involved getting it out. And so learning to talk about it, venting, sharing, or putting it into journals, writing it, finding a creative outlet for it, poetry, music, art. And we're not distracting ourselves from our feelings. We're putting those feelings into what we do, including exercise can be another release, where I'm thinking about how angry I am and I'm punching the bag, getting it out in a healthy way. So again, this is not an exhaustive list, But remember, we want to have two. And we're not going to go over them all, but I mentioned a few I do want to go over because these are the ones that seem to really gravitate that kids like, and I want you to be aware of them. So the first most powerful tool that we have with us all the time is our breath. And think of it, it's called diaphragmatic breathing, or with little kids you can call it belly breathing, but it's the art of engaging your diaphragm and getting it to be involved in the breathing. So this is how I teach it to kids, and you can teach it to yourself too this way. But I want you to imagine whatever time of day it is, whether it's lunchtime, dinner time, picture a super yummy aromatic food. So right now as we're recording this, it's lunchtime, and I love nachos. So I am picturing a really big plate of nachos right now, and I want to get a big whiff of it through my nose. And then I'm going to blow out how I would on hot soup. So a good diaphragmatic breath looks something like this. Take a minute and try it yourself. Breathe in that yummy food. Blow out on hot soup. Breathe in that yummy food. Blow out on hot soup. So that is one from the body category. The grounding that I like to teach kids that they really like, remember, it's the art of bringing yourself to the present. So one of my favorite ways to ground is what I call finding the rainbow in the room. So what I would encourage you, you're not going to say it out loud, but I want you to start looking around your room and find me something red. And when you have it, name it in your mind. Now find me something orange. Now find me something yellow. Now find me something green. Now find me something blue. Or find me something purple. Or you can also do this by finding 5 things of the same color. So little kids really like that, and it does calm ourselves down. The next one, or next kind of way to ground, is it's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're going to get our senses involved. And you can go in any order, but this is how I do it. So the first thing I ask kids to do is learn to name 5 facts to bring us to the present. So for example, what's today? What's the weather like? What's going on? Naming 5 facts, and when you got them, you put down your 5th finger. Then the 4th thing is 4 things you see, and when you see them, just like you did, name them in your head, and then put down your 4th finger. Then the 3rd is 3 things that you can touch, and touch them. So I'm going to touch my shirt, my collar, my nose. Then 2 things you hear. So I hear my own voice, and I hear the sound of the computer. And then I end with 1 thing that makes you happy. And to me, that's my kids. So that's how another way to ground, and just you can do it really fast. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So again, that's a mind. And again, we talked about getting the senses involved. And the last with release, remembering that creative outlet is teaching kids to not avoid their feelings, but learn ways to get them out, to identify. We talked about feelings are like water in a dam, and you gotta figure out ways to understand what the water's about and get it out. And a great way to do that is either on paper through journaling or putting it into something creative where you have to think about how you're feeling. So again, to recap this segment, remember the FStep stands for feeling anxious. And the first key skill is helping your kids learn to identify their feelings especially anxiety, to help them become anxiety detectives, and when they recognize it, to be able to point it out, to see it, to help organize their brain. Once they know how they're feeling, the first set of skills involve putting a number to how we're feeling, because we might do different things, and then having the capacity to calm down our arousal, to get our smart brain back, because that's who we need to fight our anxiety, to not let it take over and get us to avoid and create more of a problem. So this is how we interrupt that, by learning how to calm ourselves. So those are the 3 key skills from the FStep. And remember, as parents, there are lots of ways, because these are skills, they need to be practiced. We gave you some to practice the identification. We gave you some ways to practice scaling, but calming is a great thing to practice. And where I would recommend is to set a routine. Maybe it's when we first get in the car in the morning, we take 5 minutes to calm ourselves. Maybe it's around dinner time that we take 5 minutes before we start talking and just practice calming. But you gotta bring this skill to practice, and not just to use it right when your teen or child is anxious. You want them having practiced it a lot, so when they are anxious, they can implement the tool and not just try to use it then. No skill is going to be effective unless it's practiced or rehearsed. So that's kind of for you all, parents or teachers, how am I creating that practice time or building it in so these skills can take hold? And remember, not every tool works for every kid, but every kid needs 2. And once they have 2, it's great. And the other is, as a family, it can be very useful to know each other's calming skills. So when you see someone getting really anxious or upset, you can help invite them in to do that as a parent. Let's do some breathing together. And that's one of the things we'd recommend to try to help. Lastly, parents, just again, we recap the skills, but in your role, one of the things we want to recommend is, first off, to kind of have the mindset, I really only want to engage with my child when they're in their smart brain. And if they're not in their smart brain, rather than coming to them and try to talk to them, what did you do? Why are you upset? That's smart brain skill. Meet them if they're seeing them emotion brain or anxious brain, to see them where they're at and do some calming tools with them. Help them get their smart brain back. Then once their smart brain is back, then you can engage with them in those conversations. And another thing as a parent, start to discuss this notion with them and build more time to practice with the team in their head that they need these tools to have smart brain come on, and let's practice to make sure. And sometimes as a parent, you will have to, when they're so emotional or upset, sometimes you will have to be their smart brain for your child and help label that emotion, but then help walk them through, okay, you're really anxious. We need to breathe right now. We need to do these things to help. And so the guide, but the first step is start with calming skills. Don't jump to conversations until smart brain is online.